Good morning, everyone. This is DCED here in Harrisburg. Hopefully enjoying a nice spring day. I hope you all will be too. We're going to get started on our annual reporting webinar. This is the fourth of these that we have. They are all will all be located on the website, so you can the actual webinar itself will be there, so you can refer back to that. We hope you got the handouts we sent out around 9 o'clock this morning, included the updated reporting schedule, as well as the slides for this presentation. If you did not get them, go check your emails. They're probably there. We have a lot to cover today, so we're going to go through this pretty quickly, and we'll get started. A few housekeeping items. The webinar will last about 2 hours, and we are going to have questions by the form. So wait and hold your questions till we get done with the form, and then you can ask your questions. Or if you forgot to do that, we will also give you time at the end of the webinar. Please raise your hand on the screen or using the Q&A function. And write your question down. All phones are muted, so please type your questions in the question box. Or John will open it if you've raised your hand. The webinar is being recorded, and as I said, it will be on the website. There is the address for the website, and it is located in the Annual Reports, All Programs tab. So what will you learn today? First, the one thing is we are not going to go by form. This goes into this slot. This goes into that spot. We've done that. You can go back and look at the webinars. What we are going to do today is we're actually using actual examples of good forms that have come in, bad forms being small errors but common, so we want to get those cleaned up. And then the unacceptable. And these are the reports that have been submitted that are totally not acceptable. It's missing a lot of information, there's large mistakes in it, and it really needs to be corrected. And then, as I said before, we will provide opportunities for you to ask questions. So, first thing is, if you don't know what this looks like, here is the federal program reporting schedule. You should be using the November 14th, 2017 schedule. I've cut off part of it there. The top part includes monthly reports, quarterly reports, but I wanted to hone in on the actual annual reports that we will be covering today. The only change that is on this form from the one that you received or came out this summer, I believe it was in August, is that the mailing address has changed. We've gone to a new system here in the state, and we had to take the and sign out of our mailing, our mailboxes. So as you see there with that highlighted, we are now RA-DCED CDBG home questions. So if you have something bookmarked, you want to change that. Don't fret if you forget to change one. I know there's a bunch of them here. It will still send your form to that mailbox, but we want to get you in the habit of not having that and sign in there. Also, I want to note that CDBG-DR has its own schedule because there are some other forms and reports that they must submit, but all of these that are shown on this thing are required by, but also from the CDBG-DR grantees. Both of these report schedules are on the website. And I also want to point out at the lower part of the schedule, there is one form that is only required of the CDBG-DR grantees. So home, ESG, NSP does not need to fill that out. And then there are two forms that are only for the home grantees. So your CDBG, CDBG, DR, and ESG folks do not need to fill those out. Okay, so I just want to emphasize, as you can see, we have it bold red letters, is all contracts require annual reports. So every program listed there requires you to do the annual reports. And you must continue to do them until your closeout paperwork is submitted. So, you know, you may be done your activity, but until you actually have your closeout paperwork in here, you still have to do your annual reports, even if there's no activity. So just moving on to some reminders that your submission dates, if you look at your schedule, some of the dates of the submissions do vary, so please pay attention to that. Also, we always get, well, we didn't get a reminder that that report was due. You will not necessarily always get a reminder. We're all busy, and sometimes it's just one report. So you get this, the schedule is handed out every year at conference, and it's also on the website. So that is your reminder. If you don't get a reminder, the report is still due. Also, as I said before, they're due on every open contract. If you close out your paperwork by December 31st of 2017, you will have to still report your activity for 17, but for 18, you will not have to do a report. And also, annual reporting starts with the awarding of the contract. A couple of home people last year got their contracts in October and November, and then didn't submit some of the home forms. If you are under contract, you've got your blue back, you must do your annual report, even if there's no activity. As we said, generally our program year runs January 1st to December 31st, but some of our forms do have different program years. So again, look at your reporting schedules. We have the program years on there for all of those forms. Please pay attention to those. All of the forms are either annual or biannual, other than the equal employment opportunities. That one goes every 2 years, and it's on the years that are ending in an odd number. So for 2018, there will be no equal opportunity form. If you have an open contract and you either didn't get started on it or you haven't closed it out yet, you still must submit your report, but you put in no activity during this period, so we do know that you are aware that you submitted your report. Failure to submit your annual reports can lead to additional points being added to your risk scores, and that can lead to on-site monitoring and a high number for your risk score. So you want to make sure that you meet your deadlines. This one slide we want to emphasize, you know, if anything, take this out, make a copy of it, post it by your computer. We ask that you scan the reports individually. Do not put them all into one big file and scan them all as one. We have to break out those files and separate them because we have different people in the office looking at them. So do not scan them as one large file or use any zip files. And then we also ask for you to follow the naming convention that's labeled there. For all your annual reports, you put in the grantee's name, the report name abbreviated. So an example there is Elk County, and then FHR would be the Fair Housing Report. And then, of course, it would come up as a PDF, because that's what you're saving it as. The only one that's a little different is the home match naming convention, and that's because we need to have the contract number. Please follow these guidelines. It saves us work on our end, and you know, we can be better at helping you with technical assistance rather than trying to figure this out. The additional fund receipt, the Fair Housing Report, and the Home Annual Performance Report all require an original signature. You can send, we must send a scanned copy to the mailbox, just like you do all the other ones, but then you need to get an original signature either from the CEO or the Chief Financial Officer, it's stated right on the form, and sent in to the into DCED. And that means no administrators sign it, no program manager sign it. You do have to have the CEO or the CFO. Please submit them to the proper mailboxes. Use the version of the report that is on the website. As we update them, as we make them fillable, we will enter them on the website. Right now, the reports are marked no later than, or I guess no earlier than, November of 2015. So you make sure that those are the reports that you are doing. A lot of times grantees just copy what they did last year and change the dates on them. The reports can change, so please make sure you check them with the website. And we have most of the forms are fillable, other than those that are listed there. We're hoping to have at least the three, the additional fund receipt, the annual report on the SHPO, and the home match fillable before the end of the year. So keep watching that on the website. Please do not send to your grant manager, not even a copy. We put them on our hard drive or our R drive that we share among people in the office. There is no need for you to send it to the grant manager, and they can get it off of the copy that we put on our hard drive. So please do not send it to your manager. Also, we will be looking at the reports. We will notify people who have not submitted their report on time. This can lead to a holdup of your contract. As I said before, it can be part of your risk analysis, and it also can be part of your not being funded under competitive funding such as CDBG, discretionary, home, or ESG. So please meet that deadline. And the reason why is because DCED must submit our CAPER to HUD by March 31st. And the CAPER is our acknowledgement of what we did in the past year. So these forms are giving us that information that we in turn turn to HUD. Without that information, HUD can hold up our contract, our future contracts. So we do not want to have that happen. The other thing is that most of the forms have instructions, and we did that on separate files. That way, we're not getting a lot of extra paper. So please make sure you're not sending us the instructions along with your form. Just send the form in the mailbox. But you can pull up your instructions alongside you. Okay, so remember, the most current reporting schedule and forms can be found on the DCED website in the Federal Resource Library. There is the address for the library. Once you get into the library, go to the Federal Programs Resource Library. There are /annual reports, and then there are three tabs under that. All programs means just that, all programs. You'll find the recordings, you'll find PowerPoints, you'll find the reporting schedules, and all of the forms that are for everyone. If you are a home grantee, you need to look at both of those tabs, because you also have a home tab that has the specific files of forms for the home program. and then the same thing with the CDBG-DR. Everybody should be going into that all programs, and then if you have the specialty home or CDBG-DR, look, you go into the other ones as well. Okay. Was there any questions?
Yeah, we had a couple questions. For the forms that require original signatures, who should they be mailed to the attention of?
They should be mailed to the attention of the person highlighted under the questions to be directed to. So, for example, the first one, additional funds report, receipt, it should be sent to Crystal Stauffer.
Okay. And our one other question is that will e-signatures, or when will e-signatures be allowed?
We are working with that with our IT. We're hoping for a breakthrough this year. One has not come through, so just stay tuned. It probably will not be before the submission of these forms.
And basing off of that answer there is there going to be an easier process instead of sending in numerous emails for all these reports? Is there something like a web-based reporting system that we can use?
We are working on that very hard. Believe me, we on our end would love to have it where you could just push a button and submit your report to us. And also we could have automatic calculations. One thing that you may not know, we don't emphasize when we're doing these reports, is all of these forms have to be manually added or reviewed. You know, the totals go on into the caper, but somebody's got to add them all up. So it is quite a process on our side. And as you see, we only have a little over a month and a half to do that. And we have over 200 grantees. So, you know, we're working on trying to get it electronic. I can't give you a deadline when that will happen.
And that's all the questions we have.
All righty. Well, now we're going to move into the actual forms. As I said, we're not going to be concentrating on filling in the forms, but rather the actual examples of ones we've gotten and what is good, what is bad, and what is unacceptable. Crystal Stauffer will lead us off with the additional fund receipt.
Okay, the additional fund receipt is Form DCED CMT 154. It's due quarterly on April 15th, July 15th, October 15th, and January 16th, 2018. As MJ said, you need to email a copy to the box that's listed on the reporting schedule, and an original needs to be sent in to my attention. Okay, and then on the next slide.
Sorry, everyone.
No, go back. Okay, here's a good example of additional fund receipt, which lists all programs with open contracts where 0 was entered for the programs that did not have any additional funds. Please do include all the program names on one form. Go on. Okay, and then here's another good example of how to complete the form if you have open contracts but you don't have any additional funds for the reporting quarter. And it's good to include the program name so that we know that you are accounting for all the programs with open contracts. Okay, now to the bad. The grantee listed CDBG funds as program income, but CDBG income is considered non-program income until the $35,000 threshold is reached. Then all CDBG regulations on the expenditure are required. An example, environmental review, labor standards, procurement, etc. Okay, on to the unacceptable. In this example, the grantee did not list cumulative amounts per program per quarter. As you'll see on the first quarter, the program income was over $29,000. The second quarter, it's only $1,300. And the third quarter, it's only $22,000. The third quarter program income should be the cumulative amount of the first, second, and third quarters. And then the fourth quarter report, which is due January 16th, 2018, should show a total of all those amounts per program for 2017.
Crystal,
Yes.
just a point out here that this one was submitted before we added that extra column
Yes.
for non-program income.
Right.
But if that's the case, in the first quarter, what that 29,000 should be over in the non-program income.
No, because it's for home.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, home is program income.
Okay.
No, okay.
So that's a key point there. If that was CDBG,
Yes.
it would be over in the non-program
Yes.
income. But because it's home, all home program income is
Mhm.
listed.
Yes. And here's my contact information if you have any questions.
Any questions on the additional fund receipt report? Question is program income means, and I don't know if that's related to a specific program or home program.
We have passed out.
ESG.
Oh, ESG. Okay, thank you. I was going to say for home and CDBG, there is we have sent out program income guidelines, what that is. ESG very rarely has program income. Basically, it would be if you're doing rapid rehousing and you've paid security deposit, the person has left the apartment, unbeknownst to you, and the landlord wants to give you back the security deposit. So it's items such as that. It's money that's coming back in that you put out originally as program income. Very rarely do we see that with ESG.
Okay. Not seeing any other questions.
Okay. Crystal's mailing address, as with all of ours, is DCED, Keystone Building, 400 North Street, Harrisburg, PA, 17120. You just put Crystal's name or my name or John's name, and with that address will get to us.
Okay, moving on to labor standards, the enforcement report. This is a semi-annual report. We're just going to go over a couple of quick examples. This is a good example. This clearly describes what type of project is occurring, and this is a sewer line project. Includes both the DCED contract number and the federal fiscal year associated with the contract number. It includes the entire wage decision. So PA, the year the wage decision was pulled, what the wage decision number was, if there was any modifications, the date of the mod, and the classification of the wage decision. And it also includes the lock-in date. In this case, the lock-in date is the bid opening date. Moving on to a bad type of example is that you can barely read it. My apologies. There's no DCED contract number included on this report, so we can't reference it back to a DCED blue bag or that type of thing. The DC or the wage decision number is not typically identified on this report. Though you can't really read it, it does only say PA 17. So what type of wage decision number was it? Was there any type of modifications included on that? Or, it doesn't include the type of construction that's involved, if it's a heavy highway type of project. But this one also does have the bid opening date on it as well. And moving on to an unacceptable type of report. This one you can read. It's just the type of project's not clearly identified. This one only references that it's a main street. What type of project is it? Is it sidewalk improvement, street reconstruction, sewer line type of project? And also, in regards to the wage decision number, this one only references PA 14. Does that mean that the wage decision was pulled in 2014 or 2017? We just don't know. And again, it doesn't include the type of construction that is involved. And this one also, the wage or the lock-in date is referencing December 1st of 2017. That would kind of suggest that the wrong wage decision was used, as that wage decision was pulled August 4th of this year. That the lock-in date was December 1st, so that kind of means that it sounds to us that there's unless there's an extension, which is not noted on here, that the wrong wage decision was used. So any type of information that's like seems wrong or the bid opening date is past the 10 days of when the next wage decision should have been pulled, we do reference these back and we do pull these for monitoring. So you want to make sure that you're pulling the right wage decision and you're including the right information on these reports. Any questions? If you can contact myself or Chris Howe, and our contact information is on there.
We do have a question that the forms in the library still have the 2016 dates on them. Are these the ones to use? Yes, if they're still in the library, if they're in the library, please use them. We will check on that, and we may update that, and we'll let you know if they've been updated.
The next, the other question is when are these reports due? And it references back to January 16th. The holiday is the 15th, so we're asking that these are be due on the day after. So you should have these reports prepared and completed prior to that due date. So that 16th due date is very firm.
Yeah, I think that question relates to the additional fund receipt on the reporting schedule, and we do have it as January 15th. Yes, that should be January 16th. Okay.
There was one other question about the 10-day on the labor standards report. If your bid opening date is, for example, August 15th, you should be checking that wage decision again 10 days prior to ensure that there was not another wage decision modified and published on the WDOL website. Yeah, you have to include, if it's been published, if there's another wage decision within the 10 days prior to the bid opening, you must incorporate that new wage decision into your contract.
Okay. Moving on is the Equal Opportunity Employment Opportunity, known as the EEO-4 form, or if you have less than 15 employees, you can do this CMT 169. Last year was the first year that we asked for these, and we did have quite a bit of problems with them. Because for some, this is the first time that they've been submitting those. It is due by September 1st of the odd year, ending years. So it will not be due, and I emphasize not be due this year. But we wanted to go over them as the issues were fresh in our minds on the report. So we'll go into the good. And I apologize how small these are, but those of you that filled these out or saw them when they got filled out, because there's a lot of information on there. So here's a good example of the EEO-4 form. Everything was filled out correctly at the top in A and B. They had all that information filled out. In C, they marked the functions that they were reporting on, that I would imagine this one was a county, was reporting on, or I'm sorry, it was a city. And you see that not necessarily all the functions had employees, so it may be that they don't do that through the city. And then the calculations on the section D there are correct. They totaled everything in column O, and you know, everything was very clearly done. Here's another good example. We're pointing at where everything was added up correctly. All the totals were there. They didn't have any new hires, and they also made sure that everything was signed and under the certification, that the name of the person was there. Now, I do point out, you notice, we are using actual grantee forms that were submitted to us, so we have blacked out the names to protect the innocent. You know, of course, if you're good, you want your name shown. If you're under the bad, you don't want it shown. So we just did it for everybody. But this one was totally completed correctly. Here is the CMT 169. Again, this is only, and I want to emphasize only, for grantees that have less than 15 employees. If we see the numbers on here add up to anything 16 and above, you should not be doing this form. I want to emphasize that. We did get a couple forms in with this one when they should have been doing an EEO-4 form. Again, it's a good form. They have the total employees, they have their race, and they have their ethnicity, and they carried it all the way through. One thing is, and we see it, everybody, is that they kind of forget the Section D, which is the total number of your Section 3 resident employees. Remember, when we talked about this at Fair Housing Training over the summer, was that you're not only Section 3 when you hire contractors, but you yourself, as a grantee, are to be looking at Section 3 employment. So you need to talk to your HR department about that, how you want to possibly label that so that they know when they're filling out this form, have you hired any Section 3 people that year? If you have not, you should have zeros in there so we know that you didn't hire anybody, not just you forgot to fill it out. Okay, we'll move to the bad. And as you see on here, we have quite a lot of yellow. If you can see the little marks, we have, at first we thought we had 4 people. If you just take that top one there, we had 4 people being counted, but then in the totals it was 2. But if you actually could see the wording at the top, we have a male and female who is Hispanic and a male and female who is not Hispanic. You can't have both. So it really, the 2 is correct for hire, but you probably should have only had a mark under the white male and the white female and nothing under Hispanic. So again, it's probably somebody not understanding exactly what each of the columns are. You know, you need to be very careful that you're not, you know, counting people double when they shouldn't be. You know, good example, you know, go down again, down to the protective services, and you have one female Hispanic, and you have one female white under the non-Hispanic, but your total is 1. It probably should not have had a 1 in the Hispanic line. Okay, so we also saw some addition errors in this column. There's no totals. We have the totals in the O column, but not at the bottom of each section. So you should have those be totaled as well. Again, please, if you're working with your HR department, please work with them and help them understand how to fill this out correctly. Okay, under the certification, again, as we pointed out before, make sure it's all filled out. And this should be either you or the HR person that is filling out the report and that we can contact. We most likely will not question other than you're adding and subtracting, because this is an EEO4 form. In some of the cases, it goes to them. We let them question anything you may have on this, but it is required that we have it in-house. The thing here was that, and why I made it bad, was you're missing the email address here of the person who we should contact. And of course, that's the easiest way to contact people nowadays. So please remember to do that. As a bad example, under the CMT 169, again, they didn't include the Section 3 residents employed. We went over that. But also under ethnicity, there is no indication of whether they're Hispanic or non-Hispanic. So you should always have numbers in your race, and you should always have numbers in the ethnic columns. And we go to the unacceptable. And again, here you see there's no totals anywhere on the page, whether it's O or under each section. And so that should be filled out. The other areas are correct, but you should have those totals in there filled out. And it also was not signed. So you have everything else there, but it was not signed. So please make sure that that is signed. It does not have to come in as a hard copy to us signed. We just need to see that on the copy it was signed. Okay, and the bad example or the unacceptable example for the CMT 169, as you see, we don't have any total employees, so we don't know what universe. I guess the assumption is that there's 5, but we don't know that for sure. We have no ethnicity again, and the Section 3 is not there. So, we do need to pay attention to that. Okay, if you have any questions to that, please contact Megan Snyder. She's in charge of the Equal Opportunity forms.
So we have a couple questions here. What do you consider appropriate backup documentation for the EEO4?
Yes, and I'm sure that's somebody who was probably recently monitored. Proper documentation usually comes from your human resource folks. They maintain a listing of all of the employees that were hired and fired and raises and all of that, usually on an annual basis. When you submit your supporting documentation, which you do not do with the form, you will when you get remote monitored. We don't need to see the people's names, addresses, Social Security numbers. We only need to see a summary of, a listing of the people that we can add, that if you're saying there was 20, we can add that there was 20 people. We don't even need to know their job titles.
Okay. Next question is, do you have any guidance for how to record multiracial employees?
That's a very good question because HUD hasn't really even figured that out yet. If you look on the census, sometimes they call it, multiracial or two. I mean, there's different things I've seen on the census information on how to do that. I would say that if they're of a minority, I would mark them as that minority. So in that example, if you have someone who's white and black, you would mark them as black. If you have someone who is Hispanic, and of course Hispanic would be ethnic, so you wouldn't have they're either Hispanic or they're not. If they're, say, Native American and black, I would go with Native American, just so it shows that you have a better, dispersal of people.
Okay, next question we have is, Hispanic status overlaps with racial characteristics. Is it possible to have someone labeled as both white and Hispanic, but to avoid double counting, that is corrected in the total column?
Yes, you can have somebody who is white and Hispanic. There is, if you go into the census, you will see that the Hispanic is an ethnicity. It is not a race. So you either are Hispanic or non-Hispanic. And there are white Hispanics and there are black Hispanics. So you can have both, and your columns, will add up to all your Hispanics or all of your whites.
Okay. Has any decision been made about whether we need to track Section 3 employment for both CDBG staff and other local government staff, or just HUD program staff?
Yeah, we have looked at that, and actually we have asked HUD, and I've not gotten a response back from them. But for right now, we are saying it is the local government. It's Section 3 hiring for the local government. Unless we hear otherwise, that's what we're going to go by.
Okay. And our last question is, will it be possible to push the due date to October 1st when the county submits the same EEO4 document?
We are looking at when the EEO4, when the commission, the EEO4 commission requires the form to go in. This last year, they kind of threw us the curve at the last minute. They didn't give they changed the due date like within 30 days of this being due. And of course, everything we get sent out and went over said the September 1st. So we will watch that. That date may change if the EEOC changes their date. I can't say definitely it would be October 1st. We have to see what date EEOC puts theirs. But we'll try to blend with it the next time.
Okay, that's all the questions.
All righty.
Next, we're going to move on to the MPE-WBE subcontractor contractor report. This is one of these ones that are, again, due on October 1st, so it's the October 1st to September 30th reporting period. Looking at a good example, this is one where you don't really necessarily want to include the activity in your report. You would just want to include by the contract with your third-party contractor or subcontractor. So in this on this example here, it is a one DCED contract activity, so probably competitive in this case. So this is funded out of contract 12345, and that contract corresponds to the federal fiscal year of 2017. This is what we're specifically looking for, is that what we need to report to HUD is the federal fiscal year associated with the blueback contract. So that is, these two examples are correct, and especially when it comes to the multi-year activities, like the activities being funded out of 3 DCED blueback contracts. So this one's being funded out of both the 16 contract and the 17 contract. So you will want to include both contracts. You want to indicate both contracts on one line. And going into our next example, this is being funded out of, this is one activity being funded out of multiple contracts, 2 contracts. And that top example is what we don't want to see, and what you want to include on your MPE-WBE report is that 2 contracts, 2 DCED blueback contracts on one line for one contractor subcontractor. And then moving on to our unacceptable type of report, again, it's that multiple DCED blueback contracts for one contractor on multiple lines. And then that's the top example. And then for the bottom example, we do encourage our grantees to include multiple programs on one report. This one is encompassing both CDBG and home program. The problem that we run into, and which causes us to be bogged down trying to, figure out the federal fiscal year and what program that we're talking about, is that there's no clear delineation on the program. So in that red or that yellow box, there's a red line which distinguishes the 2 contracts for CDBG that were funded in this past fiscal year, and then at the bottom is 3 home housing rehabilitation contracts that were funded. So that's the type of thing that we're looking for, to be able to distinguish. And also, please include again the federal fiscal year that that corresponds with the DCED Blueback contract. So, if you have any questions, again, please give myself or Chris Howell an email or a call, and we'll be able to help you out. Any questions? Seeing none? When a project is multi-contract, multi-county, how are we to avoid duplication of the statistics? I'm assuming this is an OBO that was previously on its own back in like 2014, and now the county is assuming the oversight and responsibility. You will want to include all 3 contracts on one line. No, 2 different counties. For 2 different counties, the question is, if it's a multi-contract, multi-county, you will want to include them on separate reports. But for the OBOs and the counties, you will want to include them on one line. But for multi-county activities, include them on 2 separate reports. Okay.
All right, now we're going to move to the Fair Housing Report. As it says there, it does need the original signature, and it is due the 3rd Tuesday in January. And we have some real good examples on this one. First is we have the good, and here it shows the grantee's name and how to do the OBOs that go along with that. They have 3 townships and a borough, and it's listed. You can do one report for everybody that's under your contract, and in fact, I'll talk a little bit later about adding other contracts into it, but you need to delineate who you are reporting on. So we don't want to just see Mifflin County. We want to make sure that you're adding the OBOs as well. And this also goes when you do your advertising for your fair housing officer, for your resolutions. Even though it's the county is the grantee, you still need to delineate the townships and boroughs that are OBOs. And if there's somebody also maybe that's got a competitive, you would want to make sure that they're delineated in if they're under your plan. Everything else was filled out correctly for this. Moving on to the additional activities, again, you can see where they delineated who the county was, who the OBOs were, and they were very detailed as to what was the activity. How, they passed out brochures. What date did they do this on? It shows us the detail that they put some effort to the fact that you completed the activity. Up there, we have a couple things that say, don't list your prior year's activity. This is only what you're completing during the program year. So in this case, this is what they did during 2016 for their activity. Also, we don't want the activity documentation. We will ask for that when we do remote monitoring. Do not send us the brochures. Do not send us the radio ads. We will ask for that, but not now. Okay, so, keep all that in your file, and when we do the monitoring, we will ask for them. And there is, remember to mail the original Fair Housing Report. For those that asked about our address, right there it is. Megan put that in there for you. Okay, moving on then to the Fair Housing Report. Mandatory activities, we should never see anything blank. It is mandatory, which means you are required, whether you are CDBG, CDBG-DR, Home, ESG, NSP, competitive, you are required to do an activity. We're not saying that you have to do a separate activity. You can go along with the county, but you then take credit for that as well. Your date of advertisement should be within the program year. If you notice on the example there, it was January 23rd, 2015. This was the 2016 program. So that date is not acceptable. They should have done something in 2016. If you have another agency that is your fair housing officer, you might have the housing authority, or you might have the redevelopment authority. Or if you are using the PHRC or HUD, you need to put the name of the person, number 2. Again, we see that NA, which we don't like. You need to have a name in there. If you don't know who it is, then just put, agency or something like that, so that we know that, that somebody in that agency will be doing your fair housing. But you really should have a name because that should be where it's being directed to. For example, Mary Smith. Your office name, that should be your third-party agency, or again, PHRC and HUD. I want to emphasize, it's not or, it's and. So you need, you can do a third-party agency, again, like the Redevelopment Authority, or it can be PHRC, HUD, FHEO. And Megan was good enough to put those that information there for you. So you want to put the contact information then under the phone and email address. Okay. Additional activities. This is not accepted. Well, it's bad. I mean, we will most likely contact you to get some more information, but we don't want to see this. Where's the details? What was the outcome? What did you do? Why did you contact the Commission on Economic Opportunity? When did you contact them? And how is this a fair housing activity? From the name, Commission on Economic Opportunity does not send a message that it is fair housing related. So again, we need to have more detail. We don't need to see the documentation, but give us a brief paragraph explaining what you did. Give credit for it, because I'll tell you, we take these information and it goes into the CAPER, and we submit that to HUD, and that is then on the HUD's website. So give yourself credit for some of the things that you've done out there. There have been some very good activities. The unacceptable. Yeah. As I said before, these are mandatory activities. We should never, 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 never see no activity during this period. You are required by your statement of assurances to have activity every year. That means from January 1st to December 31st. So if you haven't done your 17, may I remind you that it has to be done before December 31st of this year. So again, there is no such thing as no activity. Every grantee, ESG, Home, NSP, CDBG-DR, competitive, is required to do an activity. But you can collaborate. There can be collaborations between agencies. For example, and this one is great. I can't compliment them enough. There was a short film done. They went together, the County of Clinton with Lock Haven Borough and the City of Lock Haven's Housing Authority. All three went together. They did a film. We're hoping to show it to you at our conference in March. And they all three can put that down as their activity on their reports. So, you know, think outside the box. Get together. You can do county and county. You know, two counties can go together and get compliments. You know, what you're trying to do is get the information of fair housing out to the public. And however you do that, that's what we'd like to see here. Also, remember the chief elected official, the CEO, has to sign the certification, not the administrator or the person who's putting together the form. So please remember to have them sign that. Okay, if you have any questions, you can contact Megan. She is our Fair Housing Officer and would be able to help you out. Any questions? Okay. Not seeing any, we'll go into the applicant data for direct benefit activities. This is your CMT 179, and it is due third Tuesday in January. The good. Here's an example of the good applicant data. They had 43 people. They were all low, moderate income. They were all white. They were all non-Hispanic. They didn't have any female head of household, and there were 8 disabled. Perfect example of what we're looking for doing the applicant data. And we know that there's some of the older surveys, you don't have the female head of household disabled. We do know that that's been changed in your application in the survey forms. That is a template that's out there. So we should be seeing that female head of household and disabled are filled in. So you want to make sure that that is in there. Here again is an example of someone who had no activity under the CDBG program, and so they told us that they don't have the activity and they put zeros in everything. So it's very clear what they did. Okay, this one is also very good. The only thing I do want to point out here is that you can combine information by program on the sheets. So in this case, the person or the county was breaking it down by contract. That's not necessary. If you saw the one before, it just said CDBG. That's what we want you to break it down by. Because we know you don't have a lot of direct assistance. And again, and I'll explain when we get in unacceptable with direct assistance, show that to you. So we don't want a lot of paper. You can put all CDBG together. You can put all home together. Just keep them separate by the programs. And ESG, yes, that was a question that came up to me this morning from our own in-house staff. ESG should be putting in the applicants to your rapid rehousing homeless prevention program. It's not necessarily that you're going to serve them all, but rather who has applied for assistance. So you should be also submitting this. But again, you know, generally it's a good one. Okay, so yes, here's an example of a good ESG. Just be careful that, you know, you highlight which contract number, because there is no IDIS number with ESG that comes in-house here. Just identify, for example, the first line was 2014, second one was 2015. But here's a good example of, you know, breaking it down, how many applicants they have, how many that they actually served, and racial, non-racial. In this case, it appears that they served everybody, all the applicants. But you may have, people that aren't eligible, that aren't really homeless, that apply, and that you later, say they're not eligible for this. But you're counting them in applicants. Okay, the bad. Did great for the micro enterprise, and then I got a listing of a bunch of contracts. I don't know what that means. Was all those contracts all under the micro enterprise? Were they ones that had direct assistance but had no activity? Not really sure. So, please be careful that you don't add extra things that might confuse us. Here's again, we had a good breakdown of items. The only issue, two issues here. First thing is they combined CDBG and home. Please do not do that. Have one form for CDBG and one for home. And we know home, you don't have an IDIS activity number. We don't want to see every individual, and we'll show that, I think, in the next slide. Just put your contract number there, whatever your home contract number is, so that we can identify what year that would be coming from. It wasn't the next one, but that's okay. This one, again, is home. Not sure why we got 2007, 2009. Again, we had, Fayette County Apartments there. Not sure if that's an open contract because of the date. So, should it be there, should it be there? So, please be careful. But they did a good job. They showed their contract numbers for those activities. Here is another example for housing rehabilitation, and I want to emphasize that housing rehabilitation is by unit, so it would be one per household, and so not really sure here that you actually had 154 applicants. If you did, you have a lot of them. I believe we talked about this in past years, where your applicant was considered once you take their income. They may sign up for the program, you may have a waiting list, but you don't necessarily call them applicants until you're giving them the form that requires them to put in their income. So I think this is a little high for housing rehab. Okay, and then under unacceptable, looking at the names of these activities, I would believe that these are not direct assistance activities. These would be considered your low moderate area, where you're doing surveys, that type of thing. These should not be reported on this form. What should be reported on this form? If you're doing an intake where someone is getting personal information, where you're asking them their income or their, and you're going to hand them a check, or you're going to hand them free food, or something like that, or a smoke alarm, that is a direct assistance. When you are directly giving them something from the CDBG program. It is not a sewer project. It is not a water project. So we don't want to see these type of projects on here. And again, yes, all applicants. So if you're taking applications, if you're taking intake, it's a direct activity. Here's an example what I said it was a couple slides ahead. Under home, we know you enter each person individually under home in IDIS. Please do not do that on this form. For example, on this form, what should have been one line with the contract number for the year for the home program, and then you would have 7 applicants, none were LMI, 3 were LI, 5 were white, 1 was Hispanic, 4 were non-Hispanic, and 2 female head of households. So that's also that, if you do it that way, that's a perfect example of what we're trying to accomplish with this form, is you took 7 applicants, but only 3 were eligible. But your applications were diversified, and that you didn't, there was no prejudice against their application or who you funded. Okay, and then this one, again, we said 1 applicant per household, no check marks, no X's, no percentages. We need numbers. So in this case, again, it was all separated out by address. This is a home program. We should have only had 1 line item, contract number, and then this would have been 3 applicants, 1 LMI, 2 LI, 3 were white, and 1 female head of household. We should have the ethnicity. If you don't have it on your intake forms, please make sure you get that on there. Okay, and any questions would go to Megan if you have any.
Real quick, I just want to go back to the Fair Housing Report. There were a couple questions on this one. The first question is, now that the county is administering an OBO, is there just 1 report due for both the county and the OBOs? The entitlement still has to do a separate report for their contracts that are not closed out in 2013 and 2014 CDBG that are administered by another agency.
As long as their contracts are open, so you're 12 and 13, if you are a borough or township, you are still required to submit the report and do the activity. Now, your activity may be whatever the county is doing, but you need to formally adopt that as your activity as long as you have your contracts open. So if you have a 12, 13, or 14 still open, you are required to submit the form. So if those activities are all done in those reports, I strongly suggest you get them closed out by December 31st. And so then this coming round of annual reports will be your last set of fair housing reports.
Okay, and the other question is that there was an example that showing that a contract was received in October. Could they have reported an activity done in July, for example? So they didn't receive their blueback contract until this October,
okay,
but they did their activity in July.
Certainly, yeah. I mean, if they are a CDBG grantee that got, that does it every year, and then they get their blueback for the next year or for a home program, yes, if it's the same grantee, they definitely could go back on what was already done. Again, if it's a city that doesn't, or actually, I guess all our cities do, if it's a township that gets a home program, go talk to the CDBG administrator at the county. See what they've done that year and see if you can, or are going to do that year, and see if you can piggyback onto it. We don't want to see everybody having their own activities in the area. If you can piggyback and do a really good one that affects everyone in your community.
Okay, we have one other question for the fair housing. We have an open 2014 contract, apply for money that had not been expended. What year would the fair housing activity need to take place?
It's the current year. So right now your activity has to take place in 17. You should, if it was open since 14, you should have been doing a fair housing report for 14, 15, 16, and 17 on that same contract.
Okay. And moving on to the applicant data questions. This is an ESG grantee. Can this information be found in HMIS?
No, because, and I just talked to Dave Wethington this morning about that, is not everyone, you don't put all your applicants into HMIS. You are only entering your applicants that receive assistance. Now, in some cases, it may be one and the same, but we don't know that. You may have had 50 applicants, but only 42 qualified. So you would have, the applicant data would show 50 people who applied for that service.
Okay. Can you clarify if the applicant data form is required if an ESG contract was closed out during 2017?
If it was closed out during the program year, and this goes for any of the reports, you are still required to submit your annual report for that next, in that next funding round in January of the next year. That's because we're using that information to show HUD what we expended our money on in that program, in that given program year. So, yes, if you don't want to do one for 18, and that would be reporting in 19, get it closed out by December 31st.
Okay. And our last question is, do you say for housing rehab to specify only one race if two races exist in the household? Different races for two different, or for different races for two persons, not multiracial?
Yes. Just identify a race for it.
And that's all my questions.
All right, thank you.
And moving on to our Section 3 summary report, and this is an annual report due the third Tuesday in January, so it runs from January 1 through December 31st. Just going over a couple good examples here. This good example is a report that's entirely filled out, all sections, both are Part 1, 2, and 3. And Part 3 is the key in that we see a lot of people forget to complete that section. And so you just want to make sure that you either check a box, you know, describe other efforts if you have any that are not listed there, that type of thing. Moving on to a questionable example is that these, sometimes we see on Part 2 on the contracts awarded on box 1A is that they include their entire amount of their contract that they awarded. And that includes other funds other than CDBG, home, CDBG DR, that type of thing. We only want to see the funds that were awarded by our office included on that report. So that's one of the key examples that we're still seeing a lot of. And again, going over some different examples. The first example, don't know what that is. They are just including so many old contracts on there that, you know, it's not necessary at all. So we only want to see contracts that are awarded during the reporting period of January 1st through December 31st of the previous, this year. Again, we want to see only CPD funds only, so funds awarded through CBG, home, ESG, CBG DR, that type of thing on that section on Part 2. And then again on Part 3 on the summary, there's nothing checked off. So you want to go through and identify the efforts that you've made in this previous year to attract Section 3 hires. And, you want to make sure that you get credit for that information. So, yeah, be sure you check off, whatever appropriate box or describe other efforts that you've made. Again, if you have any questions, please contact myself or Chris Howe. Any other questions? Seeing none? Caroline.
Good morning. The SHPO No Effect Activities Report is really a different animal than all these other HUD-required forms. It is a report that was created by the State Historic Preservation Office to make sure that those of you that are doing housing rehab are being honest in your understanding and interpretation of the no effects list. John, if you would move forward to the next slide. I think there is a lot of confusion about what this form is about, and because we use the same language to mean all sorts of different things, every time somebody says no effect, that doesn't mean that I say no effect. It certainly doesn't mean that that project or that activity needs to show up on this form. So let's start off with those of you that have figured out what the SHPO wants, what I want, what HUD might want, what everyone wants, and look at a good example. Here are two good examples of people who filled out the form correctly. The first example shows that someone identifies a specific address and tells me why I didn't need to see that project. Why? Because it's less than 50 years old. It was built in 1978. Thank you very much. The second correct response, and again, the confusion over, what information is it you want? Does everyone have to do this all the time for all the different contracts? Initially, the SHPO required that this form be done only if you're doing housing rehab and only if there are housing rehab activities that were not sent to me for review. When DCED decided to be more thorough in saying, well, if you don't get a form, did you not get a form because they didn't need to do a form, or did you not get a form because they forgot to do the form or didn't feel like doing the form? So we are now requiring that everyone submit a form, even though that form can cover, again, this is a SHPO form, not a HUD form, could cover all the contracts that you're involved with. And that form could easily state that either there's been no activity this period, meaning nothing relating to the information we're trying to collect, or you could also say we have submitted all the projects to the SHPO, so we have no information to share. What you're trying to prove is that you understand the purpose of this form and that you're telling me what I need to know. Let's go to the not so great forms now. This form is telling me information I don't need to know on this particular SHPO no effect activities list annual report. It is including the administrative portion of your grant, which was never intended to be captured on this form because you're not doing housing rehab and you're actually not doing anything that affects the physical world. So there's no need for you to tell me that you're doing admin here. I'm not angry that you're telling me, but there's just sort of no reason for you to include that. And when it comes to the demolition program, the SHPO is always interested in demolition, and the fact that you told me about the program and I told you it was a conditional no adverse effect, with the condition being that when you actually figure out what you're going to demolish, I'd like to see all those properties. That's not really necessary to collect that information on this form either. The street improvement project is actually included on the no effect list. If you are simply repaving streets, you are making changes that in no way visually affect the streetscape in a way that could have any real impact on historic resources, it's not really necessary that I see all of those because it is included on that no effect list. However, my guess is that you probably did submit that project to me, and I said, well, it's no effect due to the project nature, which I'm more than happy to do. But I think everyone is very anxious about the idea of not having a form from me that indicates that there are no concerns with the project. But anyway, so this form, this no effect annual report form, is supposed to capture the things that were not sent to me because I did not need to look at them. And to include all these other activities is not really necessary and not helpful. Let's go on to the next group, John. Oh, I wanted to say that for those of you that might have forgotten, this no effect activities list, which I always attach to the form letter that you get when you tell me that you are doing housing rehab. It's the same list that we've been using since, I think, 2014, and it talks mostly about rehabilitation of properties, and we talk about buildings being over 50 years old, the kinds of things you do on the outside, the kinds of things you do on the inside, and then there's a group of other common no-effect activities that could be included on that list of no-effect projects that did not require individual review. So if you feel like you're not understanding this, please check the no-effect activities list that's both in the library and also sent out to you every time you tell me that you're doing a housing rehab program, or you can also email me and I'd be happy to send you a copy of it. The next slide, John. And these are not, these are not horribly unacceptable, but they just sort of reflect that continued confusion over what's the purpose of this form, or what is it you're asking me for. The first form, they give me actual street addresses and say that it was no effect. It would be helpful if you would have said no effect list activities, or rehab involved only no effect list activities. Truthfully, when you just give the address, my assumption you did a rehab there, but it could have been a demo, it could have been all sorts of, the idea that you throw in a few extra words to explain that you understand the purpose of the form would be very helpful. The snippet of the form on the bottom is just confusing. This form is not applicable for this project. It's a new construction activity, which incidentally is not a no-effect activity because, the archaeologists always like to know about new construction. And if you're doing this assessment, maybe you're only assessing whether or not you want to do new construction. Maybe it's more of a study, but your description doesn't really make that clear. And that whole business of, what's categorically excluded, while that's all happy HUD talk, that isn't the way the SHPO looks at things. So just saying that something's categorically excluded is not sort of a get-out-of-jail-free card in the SHPO world. So my request is that if you don't really understand what it is I'm asking you for, feel free to send me an email or ask for a copy of that no-effect list. But really, what the form is intended to capture is projects that did not require SHPO review because of the no-effect list. And there's all sorts of things that don't require SHPO review. The CDBG admin or HUD home admin, or even the idea of contracting an engineer to do a study. It's not necessary that you tell me about that either because you're not physically affecting anything. So I hope that makes it clear. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them now or answer them later via email.
Pam, is it acceptable to combine different contracts, different grant years, different programs onto one form?
Since this is not a HUD requirement, this isn't HUD making copies and dicing everything up into all the right boxes, yes, I have no problem with you combining different grant years on my forms. Just indicate them at the top of the form where they ask you what contracts are included.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move to the beneficiary report for low moderate area projects. I do want to point out that all of the reports that we've gone over are required of every grantee up to this point. Moving on to the beneficiary report, this report is only due from CDBG and CDBG DOR grantees. So we don't want to see a report from home. We don't want to see a report from ESG grantee or NSP grantees. So for the good, here's an example of a good beneficiary report. Now, where the applicant report was who applied for the direct assistance, the beneficiary report is for the opposite activities, the ones that were low, moderate income areas. So these would be the ones that you're doing surveys for or getting the information from the census or ACS. This is a good example, we think. The question here is the fact that you have the exact same numbers for two different activities. The assumption here is that it's most likely it's a city, and it had two different recreational parks. You know, maybe that was Water Street Park for recreation. So please, again, you know, be careful how you put your activity name. You should be following the same name that you submitted it under your application, you did with ER, and that you submit everything that way, or in IDIS as well. So our assumption here is it is two parks. It's not a multi-year. So because if it was multi-year, we only want you to report once. But we're assuming it was twice. Okay, here is also another a good example. You see up there under program, they combined all of their activities, the 2012 to 2015 activities, which is great. That's what we want. Again, we only want to see maybe 2 pages, one with all your CDBG activities and one with your CDBG DR activities. So here they put all their IDIS numbers. They have it, you know, very well done. We know with your surveys you should be able to pull out low income. You know, if you're doing them correctly, you know what the incomes are. You should be able to identify that. So when you're adding them up, when you're doing your application, you should also be able to identify who is in that 0 to 50% category. Same thing with female head of households and disabled. Up until, again, I think it was maybe last year, our application started requiring you to give that information. So we should not be seeing those blank in future years. Okay, and here's a DR, CDBG DR. That's a good DR. It's a borough. Gave us the activity number. I believe that's probably the DRGR number. Yeah. Okay. And total beneficiaries, it has very good breakout. Again, we should be seeing a disabled number as well as the low income. But you know, sometimes it's difficult to get, but you might have to look for it. Now for the bad. Here, if you have 100%, first thing, like we said before, do not put a percentage. Do not use it. We want to actually see the number. So, you know, the assumption here is that all 29 beneficiaries were white. So we should see 29 in that box. We also should have ethnicity, female head of household, and disabled. If your surveys do not have those items on them, you need to update your surveys. Okay, this one was a little perplexing. You know, we have total number of beneficiaries at 26, but yet we have 58 low moderate income. I'm assuming that the 26 may have been houses and that the low moderate income is persons. We can't mix those up. So your low moderate should be 26 of the people or households, and not that there were 2 people or 3 people in each household. The unacceptable, and we had fun with these. This is a presumed benefit, and as you know in your applications, we are requiring you to give us the number of possible disabled persons as part of your activity description. So that should follow here. You know, if you are serving an area and that area has not changed between the time you submitted your application and the time you finished your project, your beneficiary should be the same amount. And again, you can, as far as ethnicity and race, it's going to be a little bit difficult to get from the census. So what we're saying is you can apply the same percentage of race and ethnicity as the total population. So if you, say, have 100 beneficiaries and your total population, 10% are black, then you can say that 10 persons were black and 90 were white. So you can use the same percentage. We will not accept NA. I think you should get that by now. That is not an answer. We should have numbers in there. As I said, we're not accepting NA. It is applicable, and we're not sure what activity is not applicable. So, you know, again, we don't want to see that on any of your forms.
We do have a question on if our survey income forms do not ask if they are very low or low moderate. It simply asks if they are above or below the income limit for that household size. How are we supposed to know if they are very low or low moderate?
That may mean that you need to change your income survey so that you are getting that information. I know some do surveys where you know, they ask for the income on the survey. You know, somehow you need to get that very low income.
There doesn't appear to be any more questions for the beneficiary report. Oh, just a follow-up to that.
Okay.
We're just having trouble getting them to report on their income in the first place.
Okay, so that's basically all of the forms that's necessary for CDBG and CDBG-DR people. The next section is on the home annual reports. We got a number of questions of people saying they couldn't find the home reports. You will not find it under the all programs. You need to go to the separate tab in the on the website marked home. And also, just because it says these home only, that doesn't mean you're not filling out all the other ones before this. So, other than the beneficiary report. So I want to make that quite clear, is you're not, if you're a home grantee, you are not just filling out these two. You are filling out those first 5, I believe, that we discussed. 6. Okay, so this is the home annual performance report. Again, it's for home grantees only. It does require original signature to be sent to us, and it is required the 3rd Tuesday of January. And believe me, this one we get a lot of issues. Your reporting period for this report, again, is January to the end of this, beginning of January to the end of December each year. In this case, the person did follow, got everything filled in, and then when you go down to Part 2, notice what's highlighted. It is the program income, not your contract amount, not how much you expended of your home funds that year. It is the program income that you brought in during that reporting period. So in this case, they brought in $7,560 during that reporting period, and they expended it, which is what we like to see. Gina's over here shaking her head because, you know, we want you to use it as soon as you earn it. So please remember, your PI, not only do you put it here, but you also need to make sure you're reporting it to DCED on your annual fund receipt report, and that it is receipted in IDIS. So, you know, kind of making sure, actually, Crystal and I compare these forms to make sure that it is reported correctly. Okay, moving on then to Part 3. Again, a good example. You had 6 contracts. The contracts totaled $122,571, and it adds up when you go across. We had 6 white contractors making the same amount. Going down, remember, this is an MBE, WBE reporting. So the first one was minorities, the second one is women businesses. And again, it should equal. If you're not a woman-owned business, it'll be a male business. So again, everything should equal on these blocks. Part 4 and Part 5, we generally will be zeros, just like it's shown here. Occasionally, if you're doing a multifamily rental where you might be purchasing some parcels, something like that, you will have that in Part 4, or if you have to relocate someone because you're going to rehab the structure, it'll be on there. But for most of our housing rehab cases, existing homeowner, it will be zeros. Now for the bad. Yeah, how can you have subcontractors without having contracts? I would believe that the person's a little confused, thinking that they are, the grantee is the contractor, so if you go out to any third-party agencies, they would be subcontractors. That's my assumption, but that is not correct. Your contracts and subcontracts should be with third-party contractors and subcontractors. So that's why this is wrong. And then the unacceptable. Again, I want to point out Part 2 is program income only. If this grantee made $153,000 in program income and used it, I mean, it may have been a sale of one house or one building or something, but that seems awful high, especially when they don't show any contracts. If you have program income and you expended it in that reporting year, and emphasize that reporting year, you better have some contracts that you spent it on that equals the 153. So again, you know, make sure things add up because they're not when they're coming in. Here's another example, unacceptable. When it says contracts, we're not talking about your contract with DCED. We are talking about the contracts you have or your third party might have with contractors who are actually doing the work on your housing rehab or you're building your multifamily. And that should also be the dollar amount, not your contract amount. And again, it's during the reporting year, the reporting period. So, you know, you shouldn't, unless you're doing really good, and you might be getting it all spent in 1 year, that number should not be the same as your contract number. Again, our wonderful not applicable. If you don't have any activity, you mark it as 0. And again, with everything, it should be 0. And if that's the case, get the program done and closed out so that you don't have to report on it next year. Okay.
Just a couple questions. What if the home project, or assuming contract, was canceled in 2017, and we have a letter from DCED stating as such? Do we have to do this form?
No. If it was canceled and you had no activity in 2017, and you have a letter from us, no, you do not need to fill out this form.
Okay. Is the beneficiary report for area-wide benefit activities only, or does it also include direct benefit activities too?
No, it is only for the area-wide activities, and that is because when you go into IDIS, when you've completed your project, if it's a direct activity, they ask for that information, and we can pick that up off of IDIS. Unfortunately, with the LMA projects, it does not ask that. It just assumes whatever you entered at the beginning when you set up your project remained the same. And in most cases, it probably does. But if for some reason your bids came in too high or whatever, that you made your program area smaller, your beneficiaries now change also.
Okay, and since contractors often use subs for unexpected work, and they pay the subs, are we responsible for obtaining this info from the subs?
Yes. If you have subcontractors on the site, you do need to have this information. Remember, if you have subcontractors, they should be signing the same agreements. There should be a contract with them. They should be following the same guidelines that your regular contractor does. So yes, you should be getting that information. And that way actually will be where you probably get a lot of your MBEs and WBEs, you know, that they're a smaller contractor.
Okay, that seems to be all the questions from the home manual.
Okay, the home match report is Form CMT H155. It's for home grantees only, and it's due October 15th of each year. And we'll go on to look at our good example. This is a good example of how to complete the form when you have home match to report. You list the match provided this year, total match provided for contract to date, the IDIS activity number or other ID, date of contribution, cash non-federal, and total. Okay. The second good example would be how to complete the form if you don't have home match to report. Just put zeros under number 4 and number 5, and you can, it's optional, you can put match not required. Okay, and moving on to a bad example. This report was missing the match provided this year. This is match that you're reporting on now in the body of the form. Reporting period for this home match report is October 1st, 2016 through September 30th, 2017. On next year's report in 2018, you will add this current year's match in with number 5, total match provided for contract to date. Okay, next slide. Okay, under number 3, report for federal fiscal year ending. A lot of people are putting just 2017, but the ending date should be, it should always be September 30th of each reporting period. So for this current report, it should be September 30th, 2017. So don't list 2017 or December 31st or October 1st. Okay, on to the unacceptable. This report is missing the IDIS activity number or other ID. If the home project does not involve Treasury funds, which would use the 5-digit IDIS number, it must be identified with an other ID as explained in the instructions. And there's an example there on what the number should look like. But by now, most home match should have an IDIS activity number. And there's my information. Are there any questions on the home match?
Okay, so that completes all of the reports and the good, bad, and the unacceptable. We now want to turn it over to Tina just to go over some last-minute IDIS activities as we're nearing the end of the year. Tina.
Thank you. This is the same information that we've talked about probably for the past 13 years since I've been here. But we want you to update your IDIS activities once a year at minimum. HUD prefers once a quarter. That would mean for your direct benefit activities, you would report the beneficiaries as you go along. For your area benefit activities, you would change the activity to completed when your national objective has been met. Home rental activities that have been previously completed with vacant units should be reopened and updated if those vacancies have been filled. Because when the activity is completed and you have your occupancy permit, you should go into IDIS and change your activity status code to completed, because that starts the period of affordability. But oftentimes the units aren't rented immediately, so then you would need to go back in and reopen the activity and enter the beneficiaries for those vacant units and change your activity status code back to completed. I'd like to emphasize that the IDIS information will be downloaded on January 3rd. A lot of these reports in IDIS are point in time, so you really need to get the information entered prior to January 3rd, because the reports refresh overnight. So we cannot go back and recreate many of the reports because they are point in time. And just remember that your IDIS access expires after 90 days of inactivity. If your access has expired, you'll need to submit an IDIS access request form to be reinstated. For those of you that work with municipalities, you will need to log into each one. Your user ID does expire for 90 days of inactivity for each municipality.
Okay. So, are there any other questions on the forms that we can help you with? I think one came in.
Yes, so for ESG, for applicant data for direct benefit activities, should this data include information on any individual who receives services, street outreach or shelter, or is this just reported for individuals who receive financial assistance?
No, it should be for all of your activities. It should be for street outreach and shelter. So with the shelter would be everyone who, comes to the door and is looking for assistance. Even if you've got to turn them away, you still need to make sure that you mark that so that that is considered an applicant.
Is there any other questions? Well, earlier we discussed submitting closeouts. Do I understand correctly we will not need to submit reports if closeout paperwork was submitted?
Okay, if we go back to the beginning slide, one of the beginning slides, if you close out your program anytime during a program year, so between January, December, or with some of these other forms, your program years are a little different, you still need to report for that final year. So say you closed out in September of this year, you still have to report on your activity in 2017, so you would still need to do your annual reports on January 16, 2018. If you get your closeout done by December 31st of this year, you still need to do your January annual reports, but you will not need to do any more after that. So if you have those if you have those contracts that have been laying around that have nothing, no money left in it, you've done all the activities, now is the time to get them closed out. You will need to report on them in the next annual report, but not going forward.
And just to follow up with that is the grantees just need to submit that documentation. They don't need to wait for a response from DCED.
Correct. Correct. We are logging in. When you submit your closeout paperwork, it is being logged into our tracking system, and so we are aware that that paperwork has been submitted. And once it's logged in, then that gets you, again, you do that year because you still had activity in that year, but after that, you're free to go.
And next question is, will we need to submit a fiscal status report if closeout reports were sent?
We're no longer doing fiscal status reports for the annual report. That was replaced with your additional fund receipt. And yes, you would need to, submit that as long as it's open. You do submit your final fiscal status report with your closeout documentation. So they're two different forms now, and you need to submit both of them.
Any other questions? Not seeing any.
Last chance for any questions. Of course, you can always call the person, again, on your reporting schedule. The last two columns, the first column has who you can direct your questions to, and the last column is who you send your forms to. So, please feel free to contact those people that we have there for questions. And, I suggest, I know you're all working on your applications, and those are all due December 8th. So, you're pretty busy with that right now. But, don't wait till the last minute to do your annual reports. That's why we hold these webinars early enough for you to start, in December and getting things closed out and, starting to put your forms together.
No other questions.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. We managed to make it through, as my little emoji there looks. We're all exhausted from going through all of that. But we do hope that this was helpful to you in the fact that you actually saw what we see on our end and why it's wrong and why it's not acceptable. Our hope is that we get 100% reports with everything correct, and then we have the information that we can give HUD and make sure our caper is looking very good. If not, no more questions, thank you. All have a good holiday, and we'll look for your reports in January.